so today's coaching corner, we're going to talk about the element of discipleship that I call the SpecCall, or the specific calling. Now, before we get into the specific calling, I want to encourage you to go back and watch that first episode where we talked about our general calling and how this is kind of a specific calling, but it's kind of predicated, and it all begins that every disciple, every person has a calling to follow and fish in a general sense. But we're going to ask the question, but specifically, what are you created to do? How can you have the greatest leverage in your community? How can you lead in your community? Or maybe the age-old question that someone might ask, man, what am I going to do with my life? And what am I supposed to do? A lot of people have this existential question. It's not just existential, it's a spiritual question. Like, what am I supposed to do? What's God's will for my life? And so I'm going to show you kind of an exercise. I'm going to do it here on the whiteboard, knowing that I really want to encourage you to download the PDF, because this is something that is dynamic. This is not a one and done thing. This is not a static element of discipleship. This is something every day you're going to be able to kind of manipulate it, change it, massage it as life begins to change and evolves, and you evolve as a person. So let's talk about your specific calling. Another way to talk about specific calling is your sweet spot. Where can you leverage yourself to have the greatest impact to lead your community and to feel what you're designed to do as a person? So first, let's just kind of begin with one circle, and I call this your passion and your burden. And so the question about passion and burden is your passion, as I've said earlier in this video, as far as episode 3, what is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? You heard me and Frank talking about that kind of affinity and aversion. This is that affinity, the things that you're passionate about. I get to do this. But there's also the burdens. This is kind of that aversion, things like you can't leave it undone, something that just bothers you. This is a problem to solve. This is something, if you're in a business world, you know that a business has to offer a solution that is a solution to someone's problem, kind of in that 7 elements of story. And so the question is, what is the passion and burden? Kind of what is that tension that you hold in your life, the things I get to do and the things that I got to do. Then another circle that we're going to kind of fill out is I call it your talent and your abilities. Now, your talent and your abilities, your talent. So what are the things that you're naturally born to do? What are you naturally gifted at? What are the things that you're good at just because you're you and those things come easy to you? So that's part of the nature. The abilities is the nurture side. What are the things that you have been taught to do? What are the things you've learned? Your skills, the skill sets, the knowledge that you've learned, the expertise that you have accumulated through your life trajectory that has positioned you to answer one particular question. There's also the question of assets. What do you have at your disposal? Like, what are the things and the tools in your toolbox, and what resources do you have to bring to bear about this problem, this passion and burden, and that you want to connect your resources against that problem? Now, the question that remains for this third circle is about where and the who. Like, you know what your desire and the things you want to do. You know kind of what you're designed, equipped, and resourced to do. But where will you do it, and with whom will you do these things, and will you tackle these problems? I will tell you that this comes down to your circles of influence. Everybody has a context, and context is everything. You have an audience. You have people in your life. You have people that you pass who live in your neighborhood, who work in your business, who live on your block, inside the walls of your house, that you have influence over, and they're your circles of influence. And so I want to encourage you to kind of go through and kind of delineate your circles of influence, and then lead, from the center out. We talk about leading ourselves, leading our home, leading the community. And I want to tell you, this is a biblical perspective. I want to talk about Jesus for just a second and the way that he used his circles of influence. If you remember in Scripture, Jesus had 12 disciples, but he only had 3 that were his closest. And right here in the middle, Jesus had these 3 guys. Peter, James, and John, the 2 brothers, and then it was Peter. Those 3 guys got to go to 3 places that the other 9 disciples never saw. They didn't get to go to the Transfiguration Mountain, the healing of Jairus' daughter, and the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus took only those 3 because that was his core guys. Outside of that, there were the other 9. And then outside of that, scripture says that there's the 70 or the 72. Depends on if you're reading the Greek or the Hebrew audience version of that. And then there's the 200, and then there's the thousands and the millions. And so Jesus influenced the world and world history by leading first 3 men, with them being part of the 12 and the 70, the 200, and so on. And so he called his disciples, and knowing that influence circle matters. When Jesus was on the cross, there was only one of these guys that was still standing there with a bunch of women. The rest of them had left. So context and the people that you bring with you do matter. Now, at the crux of these things is what I call your specific calling. This is that place in your life that you're designed, you're skilled, and you have assets to kind of leverage in this point. You have circles of influence, and you know how the people and the resources and the context you have to be able to answer that question that gives you the great joy to do and the burden to solve. And so when we talk about our specific calling, people will say, what am I supposed to do with my life, and what am I supposed to be doing? Well, this is one way. Now, this is not static. This is dynamic. Every day this changes because we continue to learn, resources change, people come and go, and our affinities and our versions shift as we go through life. But we're going to find that we have a specific calling on all of our lives. We have a calling in general, but every person has that specific thing that you're designed to do, and that God this is that Ephesians 2:10. I've created a great work for you to do long ago, and God has already figured all this out and put all these things into motion, and all we have to do is to figure that out and to walk in obedience to that. So download this PDF so you can kind of answer these questions and walk through this yourself. And I would love to help you walk through this. So, if you got questions about this, contact me. Let's kind of walk through this the best that we can.